With the NFL draft just around the corner, NFL teams get ready to head down to Indy to watch some of the top prospects in this year's class. And we're going to talk about them. I'm Glenn Naughton with Jet Nation Radio and JetNation.com. Be sure to log into JetNation.com where you can register and become a part of what is the most active Jets message board on the web. Joined by my co-host Dylan Terman to go through some of these names. Where's the intrigue? Who do we like? Who do we not like? Why do we like them? How are we doing, Dylan?
I'm doing all right. It's been a quiet week in Jets life, as we were just talking about, but it's ramping up in the college/draft life, which is always our favorite quote-unquote part of the year. Obviously, we like watching the Jets games themselves, but the team-building aspect in the offseason is always a full swing, moment for us. So we love that too. So a lot to break down, a lot of good names to get into in the combine, and it's coming up quicker than we thought. It's only a couple days away till on-field testing starts on Thursday.
It is, and I'll tell you what, Dylan, I actually had a thought this morning, and this will come up when we go over the prospects. And I just had a brief exchange on Twitter with our good friend Dom C. I did an article for Jet Nation a couple of weeks ago talking about it, and I think I discussed it on the show, and I just, like I said, we'll go in order starting at quarterback, but this defensive tackle class, really the D-line, if you want to talk about edge guys too, but this D tackle class, I can't remember the last time there was this much depth. I feel like, and this is what I said to Dom, I feel like every week or two, I find another guy who I either haven't watched yet or who I haven't watched yet this year. And I just go, this is another dude who can play. Like, this is another guy who can be, at the very least, like a solid contributor early on as a rookie. The example I gave was Jamari Caldwell, the Oregon DT, who I honestly don't recall watching prior to. Well, I must have, because I did have some of his highlights saved. Again, I have thousands of highlights, so we've had it happen on the show. There's a guy I'm like, oh, I don't know who that guy is, and then I go into my bank and I'm like, oh, I actually have clips of him. And then when I see a few plays, I remember, like, okay, yeah, I remember this guy a little bit. But Caldwell's a guy I hadn't really talked about this year. I popped him on a couple weeks ago, and I'm like, this guy, I want this guy. I want him. I want Peebles. I want Lott, or Norman Lott, who I honestly haven't watched much of him this year, but he's the guy that I was talking to Dom C about, and I pulled up a couple of my old clips of him, and I was like, God, he's so quick off the ball. Like, he's going to be a great interior guy to collapse the pocket, like that type of guy. It's just great. We'll get into it. We'll get into the DTs, but any quick thoughts before we get to DTs? I feel like DT, tight end, and edge are insane classes, but DT, I think, tops all of them.
Yeah, and I think we said it on this podcast. I know I said it on Buffalo Jet Fans podcast on our Monday spot, but I wouldn't be surprised if they even doubled up and went defensive line first and second round based on where the talent of the draft is. I know it's deeper, so you could probably go not bargain shopping, but rounds 2, 3, 4, 5, you could probably get the same 80% of that guy that you would get in the first round. But the strength of the draft is defense and defensive line. So I think there was a stat, 26 total defensive linemen were at last year's combine and 41 are at this year. So clearly they see it as the strength of the draft as well.
Yeah, I saw a tweet from Daniel Jeremiah the other day saying, I forget the exact numbers, but something like he had 23, like top 100 or I think top 100 grades last year on D tackles. And this year it's like in the mid 30s, like 32, 33. So it's an interesting class, man. Like, and that's what, again, it all depends on your philosophy. I'm of the belief when there's that many, use that first rounder on a receiver because there's not 32 receivers. Sure. You know what I mean? And then grab DT, but we'll talk about that later. We'll get into the prospects. Again, there will be some names that are very interesting, some that are not so interesting. So I guess what I'll do, Dylan, I'll read off the list of the guys. We may have to take turns when it's the D-line list because there are about a million of them. But I'll read off the quarterbacks, and you can just let us know who you like, who you don't. Anyone in particular that we haven't talked about a great deal and who you're looking forward to seeing. So we got Max Brosmer from Minnesota, Brady Cook from Missouri, Jackson Dart, Mississippi, Quinn Ewers out of Texas, Dylan Gabriel out of Oregon, Seth Hennigan out of Memphis, Will Howard of Ohio State, Riley Leonard out of Notre Dame, Kyle McCord, Syracuse, Graham Mertz, Florida, Jalen Milroe, Alabama, Curtis Rourke, Indiana, Shador Sanders, Colorado, Tyler Shock, Louisville, and Cam Ward, Miami.
Yeah, I'm gonna stay kind of chalk here. These guys were in my honorable mentions. I don't really have like a catchy nickname for them, but they're the four quarterbacks that seem to be talked about collectively as a group in like that early third round, maybe second round range. And that's Will Howard, Jackson Dart, Jalen Milroe, and Kyle McCord. We obviously know the top two guys. Hopefully they both throw in Shadur Sanders and Cam Ward. I would like to see them throw and do as much testing as possible. Obviously, we know with the high up quarterbacks and the polarizing guys, that's not always the case. But I would love if Howard, Dart, Milroe, and McCord all threw as well, and also see which one of them can separate from the pack. And I don't mean their testing numbers. I think Jalen Milroe will obviously be the most agile of the four. And of the explosions, I would assume that Milroe would probably take the first prize there. So it's not a matter of the testing numbers. It's more of the throwing session and who can stand out a little bit more to me in that aspect. So, yeah, I'd have to go kind of chalk with I guess, the core four of the mid-round quarterbacks. But, yeah, I just want to see which one sticks out to me. I've done a ton of research on Howard and Dart, preliminary testing, film watch on Milroe. I haven't really gotten to McCord yet, but I like what I see from these guys. So I just want to see, is one of these guys worth possibly taking at 42 or trading back into the second round to take? I know we have a big gap from 42 to 92, so you might have to get a little creative, but those are the guys to me that I'm watching to see if they stand out.
Yeah, some good names there. I'll throw out a couple of guys who haven't been getting a ton of love, but who I like, from what I've seen of them the last couple of years. One guy I tweeted about the other day, who I was expecting big things from this year because I thought he looked really good last year, and he's got a couple of really good receivers down in Mizzou, and that's Brady Cook. Brady Cook is a guy who can he's not, listen, Milroe is going to be the most athletic. He's going to be able to, run as well as some running backs in this class. Cook isn't that, but he is good enough with his legs. And the reason this is important, we've talked about how it seems that Aaron Glenn is going to be leaning toward a quarterback who can run. That's sort of, a big part of what he wants to do on offense as a defensive coordinator. He understands what a pain it is to game plan for these guys. So he wants a guy who can run. And Cook, as well as he does run, may not run well enough for what Glenn wants, but I think he's definitely not a statue back there. He's not like some of these other guys who we're talking about. But Cook's a guy who, again, he battled some injuries this year. He did play through some stuff, but he was dinged up, which is why his production was down. But I really liked him last year. Luther Burden, who to me is my wide receiver 2 or 3, with it's between him and Emeka Egbuka. Those guys are they're right behind T-Mac for me in terms of the top 3 receivers. I could see if the Jets were to take Egbuka or Burden in a trade down, I would have no problem with that. And then Theo Wees, who's the other receiver down there in Mizzou, really good player, but he's more of a later pick. He's not in that first round conversation the same way Burden is. But Brady Cook is a guy to keep an eye on, who I really like. And the other guy, probably, again, I'll just be brief with him just because the lack of mobility. I don't know if he's a factor for the Jets, but I really like Curtis Rourke, kid out of Indiana. Liked him last year at Ohio, so he's someone I kind of on my radar and thought I'd watch him closely this year. And he exceeded all expectations at Indiana. Played some really good teams, beat some really good teams. Indiana really just had a phenomenal year if you look at what the expectations were for them. And a lot of that was Curtis Rourke. He's got a big enough arm. He can throw with touch. He can throw with anticipation. He protects the football. So it does a lot of the things you look for. The knocks on him are going to be that he's 26 years old. And he's, or he'll be 26 when he gets drafted. And then Tyler Shock, who, sorry, I also mentioned, who had a nice Senior Bowl. He, of all the guys leading up to the Senior Bowl, I probably watched him the least. But I do remember really liking him from, with what I did see. And he's a guy who I feel like since the Senior Bowl we're hearing his name a little bit more than we did prior to. Mm-hmm. No one's anointing him. No one's calling him first rounder, but there are people saying a lot of teams like this guy. He's the league likes him more than the draft community does. Mm-hmm. So we'll see where that leads for him, the quarterback out of Louisville. Riley Leonard, probably my least favorite. I don't view him as a quarterback prospect. But listen, to be fair, a couple of years ago with Duke, I thought he looked solid. I felt like
Mhm.
in Notre Dame, he became a runner,
Right.
almost
How they
strictly a runner at
prioritize their
times.
offense, yeah.
Yeah, he almost became like I'm watching him and thinking, all right, is this guy going to be a running back or a tight end? Because he's not throwing it well enough or often enough to make me look at him and say, oh, this is an NFL quarterback. So the combine will be big for him. Maybe he can, show that he can do some things that he wasn't able to show at Notre Dame this year. But I think that's pretty much. Well, we talk Quinn Ewers real quick. He mentioned him just because he came up a lot on Rick Spielman's podcast. I talked about this the other day. Spielman kind of sees him as a third rounder, and you talked about the other day. Matt Miller had the Jets taking him at 7, which is like that's the first time I've seen him even in the first round, let alone top 10. But someone
Yeah.
might rise, and it might. You talked about Jackson Dart. Spielman said on his on day 3 of the Senior Bowl, he talked about how impressive Dart was in person, and said I think this guy's going to be a first round pick, and
Yeah.
he's the first sort of first person I've heard who isn't just a draft pundit, a guy who's an exec who's done it before, who sees Dart as a first round pick, and you touched on Dart. Are you at that point with him yet, where you think he's a first rounder?
It's tough. So there's 6 games available that I have of Dart, and I watched the first 2, which are Furman and Wake Forest, and those are easily his 2 best statistical games. He had like 480 yards and 6 total touchdowns against Furman, like effortless, touchdowns down the field even. And then Wake Forest, it was a little bit of a tougher test, but it's still like lesser competition. So I want to get into the higher competition games for him because he is in the SEC. I have like Georgia, I think South Carolina still to watch, but I mean, it's so tough. Like, if you like a quarterback, you're just going to want to take him wherever you can get him, even if it is 42. Like, I'm not at the trade up for any of these guys yet. Maybe Cam Ward, but that's a completely different rumor. But I'm not a fan of like trading up to 31, like the mock draft I think DJ put out had us doing to get Jackson Dart. I wasn't a fan of that. The package was a little bit too much as well. So no, I'm not in the camp of a first round, but I still think, and I'm still kind of reserving myself, like one of these guys can be a second round pick, maybe even at 42. And I just want to see if it's going to be Dart or Milroe or Howard. You brought up Ewers, and I want to just put some nuance to the Matt Miller mocking him at 7. That was just he heard scouts say there could be a run on quarterbacks in the first round, and he just wanted to pose a scenario of what it might look like. So
Right.
Cam went at 1, Shadur went at 3, Jackson Dart went at 6. So Quinn Ewers went QB4 at pick 7. So it was just a weird experiment, but yeah, no, I'm not at the point yet with any of these quarterbacks. I'd rather trade up for Cam Ward than trade up on day 2 for any of these guys at this current moment.
Yeah, that's if you're picking at 8 or 9, you're praying that 5 quarterbacks go that early, because then a stud is getting pushed down the board with some guys who really shouldn't be getting drafted in that range. Big thanks to Double R. Threw us a few bucks, much appreciated. St. Brown, Brees. Oh, Garrett Wilson equals St. Brown, Brees plus Braylon equals Sonic and Knuckles, Engstrand, new offensive potential, but also with a run option mix if we get Fields. We talked the other day or a couple weeks ago about Fields. I think it's funny. I'm going back and forth with people on Twitter who were telling me when I say that Justin Fields makes the most sense at this point in terms of free agents, and they're telling me Justin Fields isn't good, and I'm like, yeah, I get that. I know. If this is a bad crop, that like I'm literally saying, unfortunately, this is the best option, and again, it based solely on upside, because if you look at all the names out there of guys the Jets can get in free agency, now look, maybe you can trade for a Kyler Murray, something like that, you make a splash, that's a different story. But if we're talking about guys who are available, who we know will be available, even though Kirk Cousins isn't officially, he will be. Fields is the only one who isn't washed. He's the only guy who there's some untapped potential there, who may or may not become something. So if you're going to roll the dice on a bad quarterback, roll the dice on a bad quarterback who might get better, not a guy whose career is circling the drain. And listen, Fields does some things really well. Let's not forget that. Granted, it's running the ball, which is what the Jets will like, and I think that's what will make him attractive to Aaron Glenn. Again, people have talked about the history with Garrett Wilson. Maybe that helps keep him in New York and, help keep Garrett Wilson happy. That remains to be seen. But I think Fields makes sense, and I think he'll be able to do what the Jets want him to do.
Yeah, I went back and I went and pulled up the replay games from last season. I watched week 1 of Justin Fields versus the Falcons, and honestly, it was a lot of negatives. I came away with 7 positives and 9 negatives from that game, including a lot of like bad snaps, awkward throws, rushed, leaving the pocket early, that type of stuff. Just like not trusting the offense fully because it's his first game. And then I fast forwarded and watched week 6, which was his final start of the season before Russell Wilson came in week 7 against the Jets. And in that game, I had 11 positive things and 8 negative things. Obviously, this isn't just like every single play. There's a lot more to that. But the fact that I came away with more positives in the second game, including better true drop back sets early in the game. I think he started 4 for 4. He had a couple good anticipatory throws to George Pickens, more efficient and smarter scrambles. So it seemed like he and Arthur Smith were getting more on the same page of, okay, these are the situations where I need to run. Like he had a failed QB sneak in the first week against Atlanta and a bad QB power run that didn't result in a first down. But then in week 6, he started, he had a low red zone rushing touchdown, which was
Who did they play in week
effort.
6?
The Raiders. So,
Okay.
kind of similar tier Falcons, Raiders. They're like kind of the same kind of tier of, defense, in my opinion. So, but I just came away a lot more impressed. But that's to say, like, that's not, I'm clutching at straws here to find the positives of the highest upside guy available. And you kind of hit on it, the age.
That's what we're left with, really.
Yeah, the age thing is kind of where it boils down to for me. I don't want to get rid of a aging veteran in Rodgers and go with a Kirk Cousins or even a Matt Stafford, honestly. Like, I'd rather just go young and try to get the most out of the team that you can and see what happens down the road at quarterback. But, yeah, I think Engstrand could try to potentially duplicate what the Lions did last year, more to Double R's point. But I think there's going to be more different wrinkles than the Ben Johnson offense. We don't know exactly what those are going to look like, but you're kind of on the right path here with Garrett Wilson, the dual running backs. If they hit on tight end, say they get a Warren or a high 2 second round pick at tight end, they could, kind of replace the Laporta thing. So they're going to try to mirror a lot of the Lions offense, I would assume.
Yeah, agreed. And Rich, how are we doing? Good to see you, Rich. Says Dart won't get out of the first round. Again, that seems to be a growing mindset, a growing thought process, with more folks. As I said, Spielman closed out his Senior Bowl week with saying that with on his pod. So we'll see. Yeah. We'll see what happens with Dart.
Off topic, Tales of the Asphalt Jockey said he needs me to show the Sabbath album behind me. I mean, it's signed, all 4 original members. It's their first album titled Black Sabbath. I think it's 105 out of 550 with the certification of authenticity on it. So there's probably not 550 of these left in the world based on when they were distributed and the people who got them. I would assume something happened along the way to most copies of these. So to have this, I'm pretty fortunate. Yeah,
it's pretty awesome. That's good stuff.
Yeah, shout out my stepdad Joe for that one. That's a huge gift from him.
That's great. That's not related to Sabbath. First of all, did you hear that new Ozzy song that came out yesterday? No, you said Zeppelin.
No, that's Sabbath. That's Sabbath.
Okay,
no, I didn't hear the Ozzy song. I was in the middle
of saying it. I was like, did he say Zeppelin? Yeah, there's a Ozzy put out a song yesterday. Man, it's like it's clearly like a goodbye. It's like look after my soul type. It's okay. It's pretty deep, pretty heavy. It's good stuff. I listened to it this morning. I
can't wait.
Our friend Greg Rainoff, he retweeted it and commented on the song. I was driving home with my son, pulling in the driveway, and I saw the tweet, and I was like, hang on, we got to listen to this before we go in the house. And I listened to it in the car, and I was like, man, that's a really good song.
That's awesome. Can't wait to listen to it. As soon as we get off here, I'm going to go do that.
Yeah, check it out.
All right.
Running backs.
All right. Just to save time, do you want me to read all these names?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right.
All
right.
We want to.
Alphabetically.
God, that is a lot, but yeah, go ahead.
Alphabetically, we got LeQuint Allen from Syracuse, Ulysses Bentley IV from Ole Miss, Jadon Blue from Texas, Taj Brooks, Texas Tech, Donovan Edwards from Michigan, Trevor Etienne from Georgia, younger brother of Travis Etienne, DJ Giddens from Kansas State, Ollie Gordon II, Oklahoma State, Amarion Hampton, North Carolina, RJ Harvey, UCF, Travion Henderson, Ohio State, Jarquez Hunter, Auburn, Jaquindon Jackson, Arkansas, Jordan James, Oregon, Ashton Jainty from Boise State, Montrell Johnson Jr., Florida, Caleb Johnson from Iowa, Quinshawn Judkins, the other Ohio State back, Corey Kiner from Cincinnati, Phil Maffa from Clemson, Jaquavius Woody Marks from USC, Damian Martinez from Miami, Kyle Monungai from Rutgers, local kid, Khalil Mullings from Michigan, Devin Neal from Kansas, Dylan Sampson from Tennessee, Raheem Rocket Sanders from South Carolina, Cam Scattaboo from Arizona State, Brashard Smith from Southern Methodist, Bashal Tootin from Virginia Tech, and Marcus Yarns from Delaware.
All right. That is a long list. Maybe we'll stop reading the super long ones.
Wide receivers are longer.
Yeah, well, DT has to be the longest, right?
Yeah, the combination of D-line is the longest.
I think it's like 37 or something like that.
Yeah.
All right, so just a few thoughts I'll throw out there. LeQuint Allen, I like him as a guy. If you take him, he's fantastic in pass pro. He's not going to be that rookie liability where you're going to worry about that, and you can probably get him on the field early on. I thought the same about Bentley early in the year. I haven't watched him later in the season to see if he kept on at that rate, but he's another guy, another, to me, he's a complete back. Taj Brook, Texas Tech. I like him a lot. Like I watched that dude and thought he was going to be getting a ton of love come draft time, and I'm not hearing anybody talk about him. Maybe I'm wrong on him. We'll see. We'll see if he can play. Are you muted, Dylan?
What player did you say? Sorry. Yeah, I was muted.
Oh, Taj Brooks out of Texas
Taj Brooks.
Tech.
That's what I thought you said. Yep.
Yeah, I think he's a really good one. DJ Giddens, another good one.
Mm-hmm.
The guy, I'll jump. Well, I won't. I'll stay in order here. Two of my favorite guys in this class. If not for, well, I mean, he obviously is playing the higher level of competition than Gianti. But to me, Omarion Hampton, absolute stud at a UNC. I had him as RB1 for a lot of the year when I hadn't watched a lot of Gianti, and it's like Gianti's got the better production, but what would Omarion Hampton have done at Boise State? I like him a lot. I love RJ Harvey. I know he's one of the prospects we talked about early in the year on the show. Watched a bunch of UCF again the other day, and he's phenomenal. Like, put that guy on my team any day. Jarquez Hunter, another guy. I feel like I've been watching him for 8 years at Auburn, but I expect him to be sort of one of the top 340 times among the running backs. We'll see how that works out for him. Damian Martinez, if you're looking for a power guy who's going to run between the tackles and make life tough on D linemen and linebackers, he's a guy to look at. Same goes for Khalil Mullings. To me, one of the more important, or one of the guys who's going to have the biggest opportunity to make some money here is Raheem Sanders, because of the fact that you look at him a couple of years ago at Arkansas when he ran for 1,400 yards. He was one of the best running backs in the country. And then he has the knee injury. He, plays a couple of games 2 years ago, doesn't really do a whole lot. Then this past year, he bounces back, rushes for 800 yards, doesn't come near the 1,400 he had a couple years earlier. So this is a chance for him to get out there and show, has that knee injury impacted him to the point where he doesn't have that elite speed anymore? And if he does, if he runs, if he's a top 3-4 guy in terms of 40 times, I think maybe he jumps back on some radars and people think, could he be that guy he was a couple of years ago if the knee is fully healed? Because he was, when I watched him at Arkansas a couple of years ago, I thought this is a guy who could be a first-round pick. And now he's, because of the injury, you don't hear about him in that conversation at all. Cam Scattaboo, his game speaks for itself. I like him, but I worry. I don't know if I would want to draft him because that guy runs with so much violence that I just look at him and think he's gonna have a short life, shelf life. Like he's not a guy a lot of running backs do, but with his running style, it's like you love the contact balance because it's so elite. But
Mhm.
the way Spielman described it was every carry is a car crash, and he
Yeah.
meant it in a good way. It's just
Right.
violence, collisions and slamming into bodies on every carry. Brashard Smith, he could be this year's version of Tyrone Tracy, right? The converted
Ooh,
wide
okay.
receiver who moved to running back. Same story
Mhm.
for Smith, catches the ball well. I really liked a lot of those SMU guys this year, or even early in the year before they kind of caught fire and got on everybody's radar. So those are some of the guys I'm looking for. Devin Neal, I think he'll be a solid back. Played 4 years at Kansas. I've been watching him forever because I'm a big fan of Jalen Daniels, the quarterback there. So
Mhm.
I watched a ton of him. I think he'll be a solid one. So not a bad class. Not a ton of elite talent, but some really good. Like I said, Gianti, Hampton, Harvey. I would take those on my roster any day. Same for Jarquez, Hunter. So there are some good players on this class.
Yeah, absolutely. And friend of the pod, Dom C, has mentioned a couple times now. I've heard him on other pods saying that this is one of the deeper RB classes that he's ever studied. So although it doesn't have that necessarily big group of top line
Right. It
talent,
doesn't
there is
have those like
plenty.
top 3 or 4
Yes,
guys that are like home runs,
right.
but
But there's 10 or 12 guys that are like, wow, okay, I'd love
very
this guy
good.
if I was able to get him in the third or fourth. And I think two of those guys to me are the Ohio State guys. Maybe this
Yep.
is just a product of watching a lot of Will Howard over the last 2 weeks, but man, there's like not a bad facet to either one of their games. Like they're just
Hmm.
so special. Like they're just all around like high floor running backs. They're not
Yep.
going to wow you with everything, but their pass pro is good. Their route
Yep.
running is good. Their obviously vision and cutting ability to find the hole and just hit it is good as well. So I would take either of the Ohio State guys. I obviously want to echo what you said about Raheem Sanders because he did have that home run ability and then it kind of escaped him. But if he can get it back, I think that's important because the other guy I want to shout out is Bashal Tutin from Virginia Tech because I use him and Raheem Sanders together because Brees is on the last year of his deal. And if you're going to try to find somebody who's of the mold of a Brees Hall, you want somebody who has that home run speed. And I had a stat here about Tutin that even though he's 5'8", 211, so he's not the same like build as
Right.
Brees, whereas Sanders is 6', 220, where he more is of that Brees build physically. Bashal Tutin could run in the 4.3s. He did last offseason, and he was tied this season with 4 runs of 50-plus yards, which was tied for third in the nation. So he has that home run explosive ability. And if you are going to replace Brees Hall and you don't plan on keeping him around, these would be the two guys to me, Tutin and Sanders, for sure, with their home run ability. So those are the guys that I'm looking for.
Yeah, Tootin, I'm gonna have to go back and watch because I've watched a bit of him and I felt comfortable in what I recalled. I don't remember elite speed. I remember good speed. I
Mm-hmm.
remember being sort of, low to the ground, tough to bring down,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't remember, and I could just be wrong. Maybe I don't recall it.
I think
Um,
it's kind of like Brees because to me, Brees Hall doesn't feel like he's running fast when you
right,
watch him, but he is not getting caught. You know what I
right,
mean? So it's like Tootin is kind of the same thing. Like I see him running away. Like defenders aren't closing the gap. He's not, gaining yardage down the
right.
field, but they're not closing the gap either. So it's like, is he running fast or is he not? So like I just want to see what that top end speed looks like in the 40 because if if they're not closing the gap, that means he's just going to keep running. So that's my thing. It's not necessarily he has elite speed, but the 4.32 40 nugget from Bruce Felder, that's the article I found that information from. I was like, hey, if he runs in the 4.3s, then that kind of backs up what I thought on camera on the film, which is guys aren't catching.
Yeah, I'm gonna cheat here, and while we're talking about that next group, I'm gonna throw on YouTube with some Bajal Tootin highlights and see because I just don't recall it, but
Yeah.
yeah, I'm gonna take a look here. And like I said, I haven't watched a ton of him this year, but I in fact, I'm sure if I look, I'll have some highlights of him. I know I will.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, let's move on to the next group here.
You choose if you want to read all the names for wide receiver there. We're
No, I
typically
don't. I've chosen. You were about 10
47 of
names into the
them.
last group, and I was like, we're not doing this anymore.
Yeah.
Um, we don't need to hear every single name.
What I'll do is I'll copy the link from the NFL site and I'll put it in the description for anybody who wants to look at the full list if you're not
Yeah,
watching live with us.
and then what we can do, we can just scroll down and just share thoughts on guys that we like
Yep.
as we go. And
Perfect.
yeah, so I'll go ahead and kick it off with the receivers. Alec Ayamanor out of Stanford. He's a guy, I've talked a lot about how I want T-Mac at the top of the first round, Tedero McMillan out of Arizona. And I saw somebody make a really good point the other day. He said, if you want T-Mac and you can't get him, then take this guy later on. Because, again, with the athletic, insane, jaw-dropping catches, he's a guy who does that big guy, big-bodied, not as tall and long as T-Mac, but probably a thicker guy, tougher to bring down. I would gladly take him as a round 2 pick if you don't get T-Mac early on. Jack Beck obviously made a lot of noise down at in Mobile. Good player. I don't think he's going to be an elite number 1 type, but he'll be a nice possession receiver that you can move around a little bit. I think he probably can play a little inside, a little outside, and do a couple different things for you at a TCU. Ja'Cory Brooks, watched him a lot last year and very little early this year. I won't say a ton. I remember him being like another playmaker type, good after the catch, made some athletic grabs or some acrobatic grabs. Gonna have to go back and watch some of him, but I remember really liking him. Luther Burden, I mentioned earlier, one of my favorites in this class. Jameer DK, let's talk about him real quick. We'll see what I hoped he would have a big week in the Senior Bowl. He didn't. He's one of those guys. Every now and then you see these players where you say, I think this guy would have been more productive in a different system or at a better program. But he was kind of a letdown this year because he moved on to Florida. I believe he was with Wisconsin, if I'm not mistaken, when I first started watching him. And I thought he could be something. Went to Florida, didn't do a ton there, but I'm interested to see what he runs because I think he, it's funny. We all talk about how 40s aren't the be all end all, and they're not. But I don't think you can deny that that's the thing that puts guys on radars. That's how guys like John Ross get drafted in the first round as they come into the process with no hype, no love. You run a great 40 and all of a sudden someone's taking you in the first round. So we can talk all we want about how it's not the be all end all because it's not, but it's certainly not nothing.
Yeah, Xavier Worthy, case in point. I mean, just last year.
Yeah. I mean, the only difference there is that I thought Worthy was a first rounder already. But
yeah,
you're right though.
Looked at, yeah.
In terms of how he became, everybody was talking about. Of course, he broke the record, which obviously makes that much of a difference. But I think that that could help some guys. Let's see, Matthew Golden out of Texas. He's a guy I'm really looking forward to seeing. Jimmy, I'll tell you what, man, these Colorado receivers, like you're watching them during the year, and I don't know. I feel like until I'm drilling down on them, like LaJohntay Western, I hadn't watched a whole lot of. But Shepard, I'd watched a lot of because I watched him at Vandy. Good size, good speed, knows how to use his size. Get between him, get between the receiver or get between the DB and the ball. He wins jump balls, good hands. Like I liked him a lot. Western, I hadn't watched a whole lot, but that dude is he's going to be a nightmare out of the slot. I feel like him and Tez Johnson are going to be like the next Tank Dell, kind of in that neighborhood. Really tough to cover. But Jimmy Horn was another one who I hadn't watched him at all before this year. And then when I did, I was like, oh, my God, this guy's something else. Daniel Jackson, Minnesota, another guy who I feel like I've been watching for 3 or 4 years. But he's just another dude who gets open underneath. He does play the boundary a little bit. He plays the slot, quick in and out of his breaks. Not elite speed, but good speed. At least on film, we'll see what he ends up running. Tez Johnson, I just mentioned. Josh Kelly, really liked him a couple years ago. He was another Washington State guy, if I'm not mistaken. Brew McCoy, the Tennessee guy who injuries have been his issue, basically. When I first watched him a couple years ago, I thought he could be a top pick, an elite guy, but he's battled injuries. He's missed some time. As I watched Tootin outrun the entire Boston College defense for a long touchdown. I think the dude's faster than I remember. Like I said, I liked him, and I thought good speed, but like I said, sometimes you don't watch these guys for 7, 8, 9 months, or you only
Right.
watch one game. And yeah, he's got better wheels than I recall.
Well, that's the thing. If you don't watch the game where he does that thing that everybody on
Right.
Twitter talks about, it's like, I didn't see it. I don't know. And they're like, oh, we got to watch this game, dummy. And it's like, oh, okay. I just happened to watch the wrong game. So, like,
Yeah, and see
it's
now
that.
just saw him making. I remember him being an all around guy. Like he just made a really nice catch against Boston College for a touchdown.
Yeah.
And
And that was
I
what
do
he
remember
impressed
that.
with.
Like in my
That's what he,
mind, he was a solid all around guy with decent speed. But now it's
yeah.
like he's a solid all around guy with really good speed.
Yeah. And he
Um,
showed off his hands in Mobile. Obviously, the one on ones against the linebackers are very
right,
running back advantageous, but he showed off
right.
his hands and he didn't have any like, mental errors in terms of dropping the ball when, he's looking it in every time. He's doing the fundamental things as a pass catcher. So I
Yeah.
was pretty impressed with him. Was that it for your shout outs on
Let's see.
the
The next one was T Mac. I don't have to
okay,
cover
good.
him
Yep.
anymore. Isaiah Nayer, he's a guy I forgot about. I don't know if you remember. I was hyping him up a
Old
couple years ago
Texas
when he was
guy,
at
yeah.
Wyoming, when he transferred
Oh,
to Texas.
oh, okay, yeah, yeah.
And I completely he went to Texas, he got hurt, didn't play. I'd completely forgotten about him. I was watching a Nebraska game the other day, and I was like, wait a minute, I know that name. And
Hmm.
I found my old tweet saying Texas got a good player. But big body guy. There's a million. I'll just throw out names of guys I'm looking forward to. You can't even do notes on everyone.
Yeah, right.
Caden Prather, Maryland, big target, really good hands. Xavier Restrepo, he was high on my list prior to the season, and we know what kind of year he had. Rock Taylor out of Memphis. Just watched him yesterday.
Hmm.
And I'll tell you what, he's another size speed guy, 6'3", gets open deep down the field. He's going to be one to watch. I mentioned Theo Wees earlier, mentioned excuse me, mentioned LaJohntay Wester a few minutes ago. And then, of course, we'll end with Savion Williams, a guy that I tweeted about during the year, leading up to
Hmm.
the Senior Bowl. Big guy. They used him all over the place. They used him out of the backfield as a runner. They used him as a wildcat quarter runner. They used him at H-back. He's a big-bodied guy. He's one of those, like, I could see him surprising and going in the top 100, and I could see him being there in the 5th round. Like, I don't know. Obviously, I don't know how teams view him, but he's a
Hmm.
very versatile guy who can beat you in a lot of ways.
Yeah, he was one of the guys, and I guess I'll just start from the bottom and work back up because you mentioned Savion Williams, but he's one that I had circled to talk about the two-time appearance on the Feldman Freak list. So you obviously know that he has traits about him that are going to be exciting at the NFL level. But the information that I got on him that I thought was really cool was that his teammates, because he's a former high school quarterback, his teammates say that he can throw the ball 80 yards. So I want to know if after the combine for the wide receivers, if they just say, hey, dude, let's just see what you can do. Stand on the goal line and see how far you can throw it. So I wouldn't be surprised. But yeah, he's one of those like freak specimens that it is hard to, plot where he's going to go in the draft. He, like you said, he could be a top 100. He could be a day 3 pick, an early day 3 pick. So it's going to be exciting to see where he goes. Juice Wells from Ole Miss. I believe he was at South Carolina 2 years ago. He suffered an injury, only played 3 games last year, and he came back and he had 6 touchdowns last year on like 500 total receiving yards. So like not a ton of production from Juice Wells, but I thought he had some good moments throughout his stops in college. Let's see, I had Jalen Royals, who I've talked about before. I don't think the Jets will target a guy who's 5'11", 210 because they did that last year with Malachi Corley, and you can't just have a bunch of sub 6 foot wide receivers as your entire core. Tetairoa McMillan, I obviously think is important to talk about. Here's a Jalen Royals clip, him beating the defender downfield. Yep, the stuff you fall in love with the little slot guys. If you're me, these are the guys that I gravitate to, unfortunately, because they always tend to work in the NFL. But Tetairoa McMillan at the complete opposite end, 6'5", 210, 212 pounds on some sites. I'm intrigued by him because some think that he's not going to weigh that. He's going to weigh closer to 200, maybe even sub 200, 197-ish. If that's the case, that's going to be hard because what do you do with a guy who's so tall but so skinny? Do you play him on the boundary? Do you play him in the slot? It's going to be intriguing, but I do think he's a good complement from a size profile to Garrett Wilson, obviously. Tez Johnson, you mentioned, just such a small guy. Like, I really want to know how he tests and if he can win with speed at the NFL level. I know he had some really good reps in Mobile, but I saw some guy break down video of the one-on-ones where Tez Johnson, he was falling a lot out of his release, out of his, off the line of scrimmage. And it's like, if somebody just put his hands on Tez Johnson, he's probably falling over at 156 pounds, but the
That's the thing.
defenders didn't. They didn't put their hands on him. So it's like, all right, he got away
Like
with
this
it.
right here. This is typical, right? Look at the separation he creates. It gets the ball, and he just jukes the guy out of his shoes. And okay, fine. Someone pushes him over, but he's 20 yards down the field by the time they do.
Yeah, if you get your hands on him within the first 3 yards of the play, it could be a completely different outlook. Obviously, they're going to try to put him in the slot and find the best way to get a free release on him, but he's going to be an interesting case study. And again, maybe it's just because I'm watching a lot of Jackson Dart. Trey Harris, man, he's a kind of special cat. Like, he could be a second-round guy to me. Jackson Dart had a long, deep pass down the left sideline, and it was like a tap, one-handed catch for Trey Harris in the end zone. And it was super special. And I mean, the throw was good from Dart, but the catch was what you took down in your notes. So Trey Harris is a special cat that I think could improve his stock. And then Daquan Felton, I'm going back to the West Virginia Tech another Feldman's freak. He was a Senior Bowl guy, 6'4", 223. He was listed at the Senior Bowl and potentially could run a 4.42. So if you're that size and you're that fast and explosive with a 10 foot 9 inch broad jump and a 36.5 inch vertical jump projected, of course, I think Daquan Felton would be another one of those day 2, early day 3, very good compliments for Garrett Wilson from a size perspective. I've waxed poetic on Jack Besh before. I'm glad you mentioned Alec Ayomener from Stanford. 1, because I didn't know how to pronounce his name, and 2, because I think he just does enough things well where it's going to be interesting to see where he goes. And then Egmeko Buka, obviously, I think I don't know, man. He's closer to wide receiver 1 for me than he is, like wide receiver 3. Like, he's so close to me with Tetsuo McMillan because of his route running prowess coming out of Ohio State that I'm interested to see how far he slides, because he's a guy, if the Jets traded out of 7, I would love for him to be the target in like the early to late teens.
Yeah, here's a grab I got earlier in the year. It might even be the previous year with Ayomener.
Oh, I love that.
Look at that. That's ridiculous.
Defender. Yeah. Hell yeah.
I'm going to hold the defender off with one arm and use my right arm to haul this in. Look at this. Arms tied, one hand. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, that's special.
I mean, you want guys who can do things that you can't defend, and you can't defend that. You can't hold both of his arms down at his side.
Yeah. I love watching great coverage, but an even better catch. That to me is like what football is all about. Like, both sides doing their job, fighting for it. And obviously I lean offense, so I'd love to see the catch happen, but that's like a perfect good football rep on both sides.
Like, nobody did anything wrong. It was just a good football play.
I have a side.
By the way, we're 43 minutes in. We've covered 3 positions. So.
I love it. I won't tell my sidebar story then.
No, go for it. We might just be here till the combine kicks off.
I was just going to say, my family used to host Sunday football, and I had a guy who was a Giants fan, one of our neighbors, who'd come in with his 6-pack of Natty Ice and a koozie and sit down next to me, and every play said, is that good defense or bad offense, or vice versa? Right. So that's one of those plays where I could say, you know what, Mike, that was good defense, but better offense. So
let's see which one this might be the same. I think it's the same play from a different angle or from the overhead. Yeah, same play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I think I have one more from him.
And the situation, well, you could see the situation. It was halfway through the fourth quarter, his team's down. That's a great play to get down into the red zone. So, yeah, clutch plays.
I think I have a contested. Yeah, here we go. Contested leaping touchdown.
Oh yeah,
goes up. I mean, he's got himself between the DB and the ball, but goes up, contested, and hauls that in. And this is what he does, man. He's a guy, like I said, if you don't get T-Mac, if you can get him in round 2, then go ahead and make that move. Mm-hmm. But speaking of making moves, maybe we'll the problem is, Dylan, is you watch a million guys, you get familiar with so many of them. It's like, oh, I'll share what I know about each guy because not everyone has the time that I have to sit around and watch 8,000 college football games. But that would keep us here for a few more hours because
Yeah.
we're through 3 positions in 45 minutes, so we'll be a bit more picky. We'll move on to tight ends. You can kick us off with tight ends. Very deep group, although not a ton in Indy.
Yeah, no, I was a little bit surprised by like just the sheer volume of indie invites, but obviously I feel like they have to be calculated to some degree. Like, okay, we can't feasibly fit in this large group because we see, sometimes they have to break up the groups, obviously with DBs and D linemen. So it is interesting the numbers of it. I'll just
Yeah,
go in
I saw
alphabetical.
your. Let's do what you said. I almost suggested that, Dylan. Just
Perfect.
saw that Dylan shot me a message here. Said let's do offense tonight, defense tomorrow. I was going to suggest that, but I don't know what your availability was tomorrow. So we'll do
Yeah.
offense tonight, so we can slow it down a little bit and not have to rush through. I mean, to be fair, all we have left now is tight ends and linemen, but there are a lot of linemen.
There
So
are a lot of linemen, so it is going to
yeah,
be a bit. We'll probably
so
spend 15, 20 minutes just on linemen, honestly.
yeah, so go ahead and jump in and go ahead and do the tight ends first, and then I'll follow.
Yeah, Elijah Arroyo. This is probably more of your, I guess, F tight end. You're not attached to the offensive line tight end. That would be more of your Y tight end. So Elijah Arroyo would be more of your F, your power slot type even. Good week down in Mobile. Harold Fannin, a guy that he made our obscure tight end of the week a couple months back. Glenn was doing the segment, and this is one of the positions you're probably going to sign one and draft one or draft two
Draft
even.
two.
So this is the class where you probably want to lean drafting two. You want to Terrence Ferguson from Oregon is another guy, 6'4", 245 with an 80-inch wingspan, one of the largest wingspans of the group. Jackson Hawes, if you want a blocking type. And this guy intrigued me a lot in Mobile. Maliki Matavo from UCLA.
Good
He's a
hands.
guy I think, good hands, but he was dogging people in team period too. So it's like, if you want a tweener guy who is like Jeremy Ruckert, but all the things that Jeremy Ruckert didn't actually do in the NFL, this could be Maliki Matavo. Aronde Gadsden Jr., I wanted to get your opinion on from Syracuse because he's somebody that I was asked about, but I had not, gotten eyes on because I haven't really watched McCord yet. And then there was one more. Obviously, Tyler Warren is the big, name at the bottom of the list. Oh, Luke Lachey. I wanted your thoughts on
Yes.
Arondo Gadsden and Luke Lachey from Iowa.
All right, so Gadsden, like both those players a lot. I actually was talking to someone about Gadsden on the Jet Nation forums a couple days ago, and then in a Jets fan chat group I'm in with a bunch of the guys over here in Ireland, and talking about Lachey, how he's a guy who, again, what I said earlier, right? You get these guys who might be better pros than they are collegians in terms of production. Lachey is a guy who I feel that way about. I also felt that way about Jeremy Ruckert. Full disclosure.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we completely blow these things, but Lachey. I feel like he's a good all-around player. He's been at a place where the quarterback play isn't all that great, but I think he can be a solid blocker. Iowa does a nice job of pumping out tight ends. I liked George Kittle when he was coming out. I didn't think he'd be anywhere near as good as he's been, but I thought, I liked him as sort of a mid-late round pick that you could develop. He's obviously been a monster. I like Lachey. I think he's an adequate blocker, and I think he'll be a better receiver than we've seen in college. And as far as Gadsden, I didn't think we'd see him make the move to tight end. I thought Syracuse would keep him at receiver, but the dude is 6'5", has really strong hands, like tough at the point, at the catch point. He's DBs, even when they're on his back, they have a hard time getting the ball from him because he doesn't even have to out jump you. He doesn't even have to have a great vert because he's 6'5". He reaches up there. He's got long limbs and he pulls the ball down. I like both these guys a lot. I like, again, very deep class. And that was the conversation on the Jet Nation forums. There was someone on there who I believe is a Syracuse fan. He was like, let's talk about some of the Syracuse guys. And I was like, hey, man, like Gadsden to me, go get him.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like nothing more than to have a former Miami Dolphins great scoring touchdowns for the Jets against the Dolphins. That would be phenomenal. And actually, who said this the other day? I think it was on the With the First Pick podcast. somebody mentioned Gadsden caught Dan Marino's last touchdown pass. Get his Gadsden Senior.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
that's Spielman was in Spielman, and this is worth noting since Spielman had his dad in Miami. Like Spielman was with the Dolphins when they had Gadsden, and he talked about it the other day and he raved about him. He said the only thing he couldn't do was run fast, but everything else he could do. He could block. He great red zone target. Like he could do everything. So if he feels the same way about his kid, and he's got Darren Moogie's ear, and you need you like you said, I say draft 2 tight ends. Like you need a couple. But take advantage of the depth in this class. But again, you don't have a million picks, so maybe you sign one end because I want 2 DTs, I want 2 tight ends, I want 3 DTs in this class. Give 3 DTs.
Seriously.
And like again, I don't mean with the I'm talking trade down, add some picks.
Yeah.
Walk away with 11 or 12 picks and get 3 defensive tackles. But yeah, those 2 guys.
So your next mock draft is going to be DT at 7, 42, and 92. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it won't be 7. Like I said, you use that first pick on the unicorns. On like there's only one T-Mac, or even if we want to say, include Igbuka and Burden in that conversation, like there's not 30 receivers in this class, but there's 30 DTs.
Do you include Tyler Warren?
I'm taking the receiver. Would I? Man,
it's a tough one.
It is.
Daniel did it twice now. Daniel mocked him to us twice now.
I know, and he's one of those guys. 1 year of production.
Yeah, does a lot for the offense because you're talking about Gadsden and Lachey, and I'm like, okay, these sound like day 3 guys, but it's like if you drafted Tyler Warren at 7. Do you feel comfortable dipping back in round 4, 5, 6 for a tight end, or like would you rather go rounds 3 and 5 for a tight end? So it's like. How do you see the board? If you're the Jets, do you want the high end guy and then the mid round guy, or
that's not having that damn early 3 is a killer. I feel like it takes so much off the table.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't dislike Warren. I mean, you can't. He adds a lot, so it's not a bad pick. I just feel like you can't miss on that pick. The 1 year of production's a little bit scary. And in all honesty, of course, it depends on how the board falls, right? Like who's there. But I wouldn't hate it. Put it that way. I see the value in adding him. And Spielman said, that was part of what I brought up the other day. Spielman said he doesn't do a lot of hot takes, but he did one and said, Warren's going to be Warren's good enough to be a top 10 pick. And that was a couple months ago on his show, or several weeks ago at the very least. Yeah. But yeah,
based on film, I think so too.
Yeah, and I watched him just a couple days ago. I think actually I shared one of the clips, a direct snap where he had like a 40, 50-yard touchdown run on a direct snap. Oh, wow. I mean, he's not going to be doing that a whole lot as a pro. But yeah, he brings a lot. I'll run through real quick for the guys. I mean, listen, anybody who watched the Senior Bowl, whether you watched it casually or like a maniac and sat around and watched the film and all that, Elijah Arroyo, you got to come away saying, all right, I would like that guy. Good size, create separation, good hands. I think he's gonna, I think he made himself some money down in Mobile. Gavin Bartholomew, don't love, a little slow, but I mean he's huge. He's enormous, so he's gonna be a slower guy. Dupree from Alabama, I think that's how it's pronounced. I think he's solid. I think he's another not elite at any one thing, but can do a few different things well. Harold Fannin, very versatile. That was something that Spielman talked about, saying, I don't know what position he's going to be. Just, call him a football player because you can use him in so many different spots. He may not necessarily be your inline tight end, fullback, H-back, slot. You can do a little bit of everything, more than willing as a blocker. Gadsden, we talked about. Hawes, you mentioned, phenomenal blocker. Wasn't asked to catch the ball a whole lot, but you're talking Georgia Tech. He could be one of those guys where you draft him and you're like, oh, he can do that thing that we never saw him do because nobody ever asked him to do it. So we'll see what happens there. I think Brant Kuthi is an interesting one out of Utah. I remember 2 years ago when they had Kincaid. They had like a run where they had like 2, 3, 4 really good tight ends in a row. And then there was talk about Kuthi maybe being the best of the bunch, and then he had some injuries and missed some time and kind of didn't pan out or didn't produce the way people thought he would. But I think the potential for him to be a solid player is there, a better than solid player. Lacey, we
Turns
talked about.
26 at the end of the season, though. So an
Is he
older
that
brother.
old?
Yeah.
That's the thing. When you get COVID guys and you get
Yep.
guys who missed years with injuries,
Yep.
this is what starts to happen. Is
you get the Cam Risings of the world, grown men playing against boys,
collecting Social Security and playing college football at the same time.
Somebody quote tweeted it and said, "Dude, just go sell insurance already."
That's the thing, though. I look at that. Like Cam Rising, a couple of years ago, there was talk of him being an NFL-worthy quarterback.
Dude, I know. Yeah.
I mean, he can't think he's an NFL quarterback if he's still going back to school.
Right. No, 6-year starter for Kuthi. 2018.
That long? Jesus, never mind.
2018 was his first year.
Day 3 UDFA. Colston Loveland is a guy who earlier in the year was getting talked up over Warren.
Mm-hmm.
And he's, different type of player, but obviously has the ability to be really good. Mason Taylor, I don't want Jason Taylor's kid. I didn't want Jason Taylor on the Jets. I don't want no. I mean, in all seriousness though, no, good player. You wouldn't mind having him.
Mm-hmm.
And Joshua Simon is a guy I actually, while we were talking, I've just pulled up some of his highlights. He's the guy that I've watched the least of, so I can't really say much about him. Nesbitt out of North Carolina, I've been up and down on him. He started out there as a wide receiver, eventually moved to tight end. I don't know. To be honest, I haven't watched a lot of him this year. I watched a ton because of Drake May. I watched a ton of him last year.
Yeah.
So I probably should shut my mouth before I watch more of him this year.
All right. With that, we are on the final position group of the night, offensive line. And Glenn's going to kick us off and read all names. No, I'm just kidding. There's a ton. There's
top to bottom and bottom to top.
I got 50 names here on the list, which is absolutely ridiculous. But to me, I don't think it's the strength of this class. I know there's a lot of names, but it's like, I don't think any of these guys are worthy at 7. Even in a trade down scenario, I think you'd still prioritize other positions depending on how far back you traded down. And even at pick 42, it's hard to say, I want that guy. So maybe this is the draft where you have to do the thing the Jets don't do and hit on a guy in rounds 3 through 6 and see what happens. We had McCagnon, who didn't spend any, high capital on offensive linemen. And then you had Joe Douglas, who did the inverse and got, Becton, who obviously didn't work out for the Jets. But then you have Tippmann and Fashanu, who certainly have. So
AVT.
Now AVT as well. Thank you. So now you have to find that middle ground of okay, let's hit on something else. So that's going to be intriguing about this class. But any names that stick out to you right away?
Let's see. I mean, Kelvin Banks out of Texas. Obviously, he seems to be the guy who's at the top of a lot of people's list. Mm-hmm. Tyler Booker, the guard, plug and play guy. Anthony Belton out of NC State. I could be wrong, but I feel like there was a time where he was getting talked about, and I mean last offseason, maybe even the year before, where he was being talked about as he might be the best tackle, or he might be tackle 1 coming out. That's obviously not panned out that way. He's fallen quite a bit. Will Campbell, another guy. Well, I guess Campbell is the consensus one. I said Banks. Banks is sort of the first one that's in question. Will he go? Will he be the next tackle? Mm-hmm. But Campbell is the number 1 guy, and people feel like he can play in either spot. Josh Connerly, I talked about the other day, super, super athletic tackle. Eli Cox, not a huge fan. I just remember him being too slow and plodding when I watched him last year. And actually, I take that back. That was Kentucky had 2 much bigger linemen last year, and the guy I'm thinking of, his name escapes me. He was drafted last year, and Cox was actually a center who I thought was better than that guy. I forget his name at the moment. Mm-hmm. So Cox, I actually did like him on the interior in Kentucky. Ariante Ursary, he's probably he's my guy among the tackles this year, just because I think he's a first rounder, and I'm not out on a limb there. I've seen a fair number of people project him in the first round, but I've seen a lot of people say no way, he's a round 3 guy. I've said worst case scenario, he's top 50. To me, if the Jets were to get him in the second round, that would be phenomenal. Even though, as you said, they, let's find someone outside of the top 2 rounds and find a player there somehow. Miles Frazier, we've talked about, absolutely love his game. He's just mean, nasty, strong, powerful. Joshua Gray, another one, plays with a mean streak. I like him. Donovan Jackson, I think he might be.
He's interesting.
Yeah, I watched him and was like, I think he made him and Ursary, to me, were the two guys, and listen, I'm not saying after a couple of snaps, but sometimes you watch a guy and you're like 3 or 4 snaps in and you're like, this dude is just, he's a dude, right?
He's got it. Did you watch him at left guard or did you watch him at left tackle? Because I know he played tackle in a pinch for Ohio State.
He did, and I didn't, saw him in some of the games late in the year, but I watched him more extensively at guard.
Okay.
And then little bit at tackle. That's how you
project him then as a guard.
Well, I mean, the way he played at tackle, I think he's going to at least get a look there.
Yeah.
I project him as a guy who's going to get a shot at tackle.
Right. Because we're both of that mindset. Try the guy at the premium position, tackle.
Yes. I hate when I hear, like, draft him and put him at guard.
Yeah.
I'm like
the Skoronsky thing. Like, why
draft him and look at him at tackle at least. And then,
absolutely.
But these people who just assume right away, move him to guard. Yeah. Like, no, let's see what he can do somewhere else.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah, let's see who else we got here. Emory Jones is a guy, he looked really good at guard at the Senior Bowl after playing tackle at LSU. Drew Kendall. Can we draft Drew Kendall, please? I want some former New York Jets children on this roster.
I didn't know that was a Jet.
Son of former Jet, former Boston College Eagle, Pete Kendall, Jason Kendall, no longer current, but Boston College Eagle, who is coming out, center guard type player, takes after his dad. Good player on the interior. I would love to see him there. Kendall was actually like the second or third player I ever interviewed when I started with Jet Nation. He was couldn't have been a nicer guy. Real funny dude. So
now you gotta get Drew on so we could talk to him.
Get Drew in the building. Chase Lund out of Connecticut, tough to find a lot of film on them, but I thought he was pretty athletic. Marcus, now listen, I've been for 2 years, I've been pronouncing his name Embo.
Yes.
And then during the Senior Bowl, I hear them pronouncing it just Bo. And then I listened to someone the other day and they were saying Embo. So I'm like, I don't know what the hell to do here. I'm just going to say I like the player.
Yeah.
Actually, I was calling him Mbao. And I think that's how I was heard it pronounced the other day. And I'm like, that's how I was saying it. Then Daniel Jeremiah saying Bo. Anyway, the Purdue lineman, who I'm going to call Mbao until I hear otherwise. I like him a lot. And then I can see where someone might confuse him with Armand Membu out of Missouri, who I think this was another conversation on the Jet Nation message boards the other day that we were all in total agreement, everyone in the conversation, that this dude is another baller. He's a starter day one. Put him at right tackle. Spielman insists he's not a tackle. Spielman's like, he's got a dumpy body and he's too short. He's going to have to move into guard. We'll see about that because he, to me, dominant player at tackle. In fact, I believe in DJ's latest mock, he had him going 14. But DJ said has the tools to play tackle, but he's a day one guard. So
this is Membu, right?
Yeah, Membu, not Mbao.
Yep.
So that's Membu. We won't. Jack Nelson, day 3 versatile guy. I like. I'm 99% sure he's played both tackle spots. At Wisconsin, he's another one who's been there forever. Jonas Salvianea, the Arizona tackle. Again, I would work him there, but he looked much better at guard than he did at tackle down in Mobile. And let's see who else we got. Xavier Truss. I've seen him play guard and tackle at Georgia. If they feel like he has that positional versatility, he's a swing tackle, a guard type, then go with him. Clay Webb at Jacksonville State. I've not watched him this year. I forget why. I think I saw his name and searched. I knew I had some tweets on him last year. I thought he would have a much better year. I think I said he could be like a top, go in the top 2 rounds or top 50. Just to me on film, he looked super athletic and a good motor. He did have plays where he was physical, but there were some plays where it looked like he maybe let up on the block too early. The play was still far from over, and he wasn't really driving guys into the ground the way you want to see. But I think his athleticism makes him an intriguing option. And then John Williams out of Cincinnati.
Sorry,
what's that?
He was a guard at Jacksonville State.
He was when I watched him.
Because he played center in Mobile. They had him take center reps. So I just didn't know if he played center in the season or if that was just
Yeah,
something
when
tried
I
out.
watched him, because again, when you're talking Jacksonville State, tough to get film,
Yeah.
and that was last year. I think I found 2 or 3 games on him, and his athleticism popped for me.
Mm-hmm.
John Williams out of Cincinnati. Hey, he's got the requisite length. He's got not I wouldn't say an elite pass blocker, but good enough that I feel like as a tackle he should be getting more talk. But I've not really heard his name a whole lot. But I watched him probably 2-3 weeks ago. And, so listen, we talk all the time, right, about how, PFF isn't a be all end all. But
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I watch a guy and I'm like, am I crazy here? Because he looks pretty damn good to me. And I'm not hearing anybody talk about him. Let's see what PFF says. I forget what the grades were on him, but going off memory, like they were pretty damn good. I'm like, well, there's somebody else thinks he can play football. And we'll find out come draft time if anyone else does. But I think he'll find himself drafted on day 3 out of Cincinnati.
Yeah, so I'll start from the bottom up just because I was scrolling as you were naming him. Gray Zabel, the guard from North Dakota State. I don't even know if guard is right for him. You could probably just call him an offensive lineman.
Yeah.
I don't know if somebody will view him as a left tackle. That's where he played this past season. So we'll see exactly who values him where on the offensive line, but he's intriguing. I think he won interior offensive lineman of the week in Mobile, so that's a big win for him. You mentioned Clay Webb, and Dom C, our buddy in the chat, says Webb had 2 years at guard and 2 years at center. So
yeah,
thank you,
so I
Dom.
saw him at guard.
This is why we count on you so much, because you are the guy for this stuff. Cam Williams from Texas. Kelvin Banks gets a lot of talk, but I think the opposite side tackle at Texas doesn't get enough buzz at 6'5", 335. I think he could be an intriguing, late day 2, early day 3 type of guy. Where was Jackson Slater from Sacramento State, another Feldman's Freaks Senior Bowl guy. He's an interior guard from Sac State. A lot to be, I guess, a lot of intrigue around him. I'm not exactly sure where he's being penciled in mock drafts, maybe like early day 3. So he could be an intriguing guy there, because I'm not looking at guys who are going to start right away. Maybe more guys that are depth that could start in a year or 2. Say John Simpson doesn't renew his contract. He's on the last year of his deal. AVT is going into the final year of his fully guaranteed 5th-year option on the rookie deal. So you have some potential future question marks at guard. Josh Simmons, the left tackle from Ohio State, or is it left tackle from Ohio State, right?
Yep.
Kind of an intriguing prospect to me. A lot of people have him like back end of first round. I'm not quite sure if I'm there with him yet, but the more I study him, obviously I've been watching a lot of Will Howard. I have to do more of just line study from Ohio State, but he could be an intriguing guy. I'm not sure if you mentioned Wyatt Milam from West Virginia, but he's somebody I started off really high on him, and I liked what I was watching when I think it was Penn State against Abdul Carter. I thought he did really well, and then not an impressive week in Mobile. I think they even moved him inside to guard a little bit, so we'll see exactly what happens with him. He doesn't necessarily meet the 33-inch arm length for tackle. So some teams, maybe the Jets and Muji, have those thresholds that they don't want to breach, and 33-inch arm length for tackles is a big one for teams. So that might change his outlook. Another Ohio State lineman, Seth McLaughlin, the center. I think he's an intriguing one too. Again, just Ohio State, they have 3 or 4 guys going. You have Donovan Jackson, who you mentioned earlier. There was another guy that you mentioned. Oh yeah, Ariante Ursary. I'm intrigued, and 40 time does not matter for offensive linemen, but 10-yard splits do, especially if you're going to be a pulling guard or in a run-heavy system where you're asked to work up to the second level and block in space. Ariante Ursary is but projected to have a 1.52 10-yard split, which anything in that range is really good for offensive linemen. But then you consider he's 340 pounds almost. He's got super long arms, 34-inch arms, 81-inch wingspan. So I'm really intrigued by him. So I'm glad you shouted him out. You might as well just shout out the entire LSU offensive line, because 4/5
Frazier,
are there.
Yep.
Yeah, Dellinger's the worst of the bunch, and I still think he has a draftable grade.
Yeah.
So it's, he's a different scheme. I think he's more of like I guess like a gap scheme, right? More of like the Ravens type, more so than get him out in space and zone blocking schemes because of his, I don't know, he's just a little bulky. He runs a little like clunky. But yeah, being the worst of that group is still not a bad thing
Yeah.
because they're all very good. You mentioned Connerly, the Oregon, left tackle, true left tackle. I think he's going to be really fun to watch at the NFL level. I would say him and Ursary would be the guys at 42. And I know I said earlier there's probably not a guy I would take at 42, but those would be the two, Connerly and Ursary at 42 that I would consider. I still don't think I would pull the trigger because I would want to go bargain shopping in rounds 3 to 5, but Ursary and I think Connerly would be the guys if they made it that I would definitely give a long look at. And then Tyler Booker, I mean, he's getting top 10 love. The Bears are mocked to take Tyler
Yeah.
Booker at 10 or 11, wherever they're picking. So he could have a lot of intrigue too.
Yeah, he's, again, there's that handful of guys who you look at and you just think he's starting day one, and he's one of them. So, like we said, not the deepest class, but there are some guys in there, Frazier is just one of the meanest, nastiest guys in the class. I would want him as a tone setter type. My info, good to see you, bud. My info says he would go wide receiver at 7. That's kind of my take. I did, and I said this before. I did Dom C's show a few weeks back, and we did a mock, and I took Graham Barton, not Graham Barton. I took Mason Graham for the Jets, and the more I thought about it, I was like, I can get a good tackle in the second round, another one in the third round. Like, I can't get another receiver anywhere near what I can get from McMillan. Again, even tight end, where Warren is clearly tight end 1, but you could get, I feel like if you got an opportunity in the second round, there would be some other really good tight ends there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd go receiver in the first round, especially, Devontae's leaving. And I mean, Jesus, if Garrett's demanding a trade, you might have to go receiver in the first and second round.
Yeah.
That could get ugly because, those guys make so much money in free agency. Even with the cap going up, you don't want to go out and overspend on a receiver or two. You get a mid-level guy and 2 picks. I mean, let's hope we're not having that conversation. Let's not hope we're talking
let's not
about.
give Tim Patrick like wide receiver 1B money, please.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, it's like you hate the thought of if Garrett's that unhappy, if he wants to go, then the conversation, of course, what does he bring back in trade? Does he get you? Because I feel like wherever he goes, he's going to be a 1,500-yard guy.
Right.
But before we go, actually, someone mentioned this in the chat earlier, Dylan, and I've had the thought, I've had the nightmare. I don't think you're a real Jets fan if you hadn't. Not that it's going to matter at the end of the day to the Jets, but if he plays, and of course it depends on where he goes. I don't know. I look at the way Aaron Rodgers played later in the season with the improved mobility, and I think he's going to go somewhere and be not MVP Aaron Rodgers, but he's going to be a much better version of the guy the Jets had last year. I'm sure that thought's crossed your mind.
Yeah, of course it has. I mean, that's not only the Jets thing to do, but you're also putting a chip on Aaron Rodgers' shoulder. And I think the hype and the drive that he had entering the 2023 season is more of the energy we're going to see from him this season. Obviously, he was in the gym a couple days ago with some of the upcoming rookies. I know the paparazzi caught him going out to his car where he said he wants to be on a team that wants him. Subtle shot at the Jets, and then he also wants to be on a good team. So no, it doesn't surprise me if he goes and leads a team on a playoff run. Of course, we'll sit in here and say, well, what if the Jets kept him and they could have been on this playoff run? Nothing's guaranteed. I think I don't know. It's so tough. Like I want to talk about it more because like as a fan, I'm like I want to hold on to the Aaron Rodgers stuff, but it's so hard. Once the games are
Yeah,
played though, are played though, and this is the result, if that is the result, we can talk about it more. But for right now, it's like it almost hurts so much to just not like, hurts, but it's weird to talk about because he's not on a team. And if he does join a team, it'll be interesting, but I'm still holding out hope that he retires, man, because I don't want to see that bad man Aaron
same thing we
Rodgers.
saw with Favre.
Yeah, somebody mentioned it that he'd go to Pittsburgh and play us Monday night in week 1. And I'm like, oh, God, could you imagine? Because for all intents and purposes, people say we have a better roster than the Steelers, but they have the better coaching clearly. And maybe not, we're closing the gap with Aaron Glenn, but you get Aaron Rodgers with a good coach team, who knows what can happen. So, yeah, it's
Speaking of Pittsburgh, this is sorry. Finish your thought, and then I had a question about them.
Overall, it's just weird for me. Like as a fan of him, I want to see him play, but at the same time, I don't want to do the God damn it. Aaron Rodgers throws for 300 in his first game with X team, and he only did that once with the Jets and hadn't done it in 4 years prior, or whatever the stat was that Packers fans obsessed over. So it'll that's what's going to happen if he plays, but I'm holding out hope he retires.
Yeah, did you happen to catch the George Pickens press conference at the end of the year after that final Steelers loss?
No, he's always a character too. So
well, now we know why he didn't go top 10, because he's a top 10 talent. He's an incredible receiver.
Yeah.
But some of the stuff he says, they asked him a question. They asked him a couple questions, and the last one, again, it was final game of the year. And the first one wasn't bad. I saw 2 of the questions that he answered. The first one, I can't remember that now, but that's the important one was the second one. They said, "Are you excited about what the future holds for the offense?" And he's like, "No," and he walked away.
Oh man, they're probably going to lose both their quarterbacks. I mean, I don't know if that's a good or bad thing in his mind, but if they were able to upgrade the quarterback position, I mean, why can't that team be a deep playoff team? The way that defense played, I'm like I said, 100%. I watched the 2 games of Justin Fields last year. There were 4 or 5 drives in those 2 games alone where the Steelers started with the ball inside the opponent's 40-yard line because of how good their defense was. Like Justin Fields he had short fields at least 2 or 3 times, like inside the red zone even. So it's like it's a good team if you could put it all together and upgrade at quarterback. I don't know if Rodgers is the guy, but yeah, that's a tough look for George Pickens, who people had him ranked higher than Garrett Wilson on their top 100s coming into the season. Garrett was 72 and George was 68. I'm like, come on, this is ridiculous. I get it, they're talented, but like, I don't know. The quarterback proof of Garrett Wilson.
I mean, so is Garrett, but
no. I'm saying Garrett was quarterback proof. I don't necessarily think George Pickens is quarterback proof, but I do think he makes that spectacular catch every like quarter and a half. That's like, okay, goddamn, like that's what we saw. Like his head is over, like backwards, falling away, catching it with like 3 fingers. So like, yeah, he does the spectacular stuff, but I still think Garrett is more of a consistently good.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, I just mean in terms of like,
that's my biggest,
like at the top of their game. I think you could say Pickens is better, but what are you getting? As you said, kind of the same argument I used to make years ago with Randy Moss, right? Like to me, easily the most talented receiver I've ever seen in my life. But I'd take Jerry Rice over him every day because you knew every single day you were getting 110% from Jerry Rice. With Randy Moss said at one point in his career, I can't remember the exact words, but basically said something to the effect like, I play when I feel like it. Like I'm not like you're gonna have days where I don't try. But I mean, those weren't exact words, but I believe the exact words were, I play. It was something along those lines.
Yeah.
And it was probably his rookie year, but there was a time when one of his teammates, I think, got fed up with it, with him not blocking. And he kind of said, like, post game without saying Moss by name, it was after a loss. And he said, it was an offensive player who said, it's tough sometimes when you're playing 11 on 10. And that's what he was talking about. And like Moss, Nobody more talented.
And that's
Nobody.
Pickens too. Like he does not like
This
to
is what I
block a
mean.
lot.
That's what I'm saying. Like, give me Garrett Wilson over Pickens based on consistency and effort.
Yep. The
But just
highs
in
are
terms of,
higher, but the lows are lower for sure.
yes, exactly. And there are a lot more of them. So yeah.
Yep.
I don't know what you do if you're Pittsburgh with that guy. Like, you don't want him in your locker room, but who's going to take
What's up with them having like cancerous? I hate using the word cancerous, but wide receiver has been they are good at developing, but then all of a sudden they just like lose their
Martez
cool,
Bryant. Everyone
or
talks
they're
about
on
AD, but
social
Martez
media too
Bryant,
much.
who,
Yeah,
yep, they've
Juju
had,
Smith. I mean, like,
yeah,
they go through the ringers. Like you got to
it's
have.
weird. It's almost like Mike Tomlin is like one of those people who wants to like fix broken people. Like,
Yeah,
find me a broken receiver. I'm going to make him a good player, and I'm going to make him a better man. You know, like,
yeah.
maybe for a
Doesn't always
couple of
work.
years, but it falls apart eventually. Anyway, that's enough about Steelers broken receivers. Tomorrow night, we'll hop back on tomorrow night to do defense because there's a lot of guys. Long list. Those D linemen. Looking forward to doing that. That'll wrap this one up. Have a good one, Jets fans.